The waitress moved from the crowded diner with a tray balanced carefully against her hip. Her name was Marissa Lane, and every step she took was measured, deliberate, because her right hand was wrapped tight in white bandages that stretched nearly to her elbow. Still, she carried steaming coffee mugs in her left hand, plastering on the same polite smile she always did. From a distance, it almost looked effortless. Up close, anyone could see the strain. Her manager, Cliff Barnes, made sure of that. "Pick it up, Marissa," he barked from behind the register, his voice sharp enough to turn heads. "This isn't a nursing home. People are waiting." The chatter at the counter faltered, forks paused midair. Some customers lift away quickly, embarrassed for her. Others shook their heads, whispering, pity written across their faces. Marissa pretended not to hear, just as she pretended the bandages didn't burn each time she brushed a surface too quickly. But Cliff's voice cut through every wall she tried to build around herself. What none of the customers knew, not the two women in pencil skirts sipping black coffee, not the truckers shoveling eggs by the window, was that Marissa's injury wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't clumsiness. And Cliff wasn't just a strict boss with a temper. There was something darker beneath his cruelty. Something only Marissa had glimpsed. And in the far corner booth, beneath the hum of neon lights and the hiss of the grill, a man stirred his coffee slowly, watching. Henry Dawson looked like just another retiree with nowhere else to be, white hair cropped neat, denim jacket, steel-toe boots that had seen more years of road than city sidewalks. To most, he was a quiet regular, a creature of habit who always ordered the same black coffee. But Henry wasn't just another customer. He was the undercover owner. And the longer he watched Marissa struggle, the more certain he became that something in his diner was deeply, dangerously wrong. Before we dive deeper, if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring more stories like this one to light. Stories about resilience, justice, and the unexpected strength of people who refuse to break. Stick with us until the very end, because the truth Henry uncovered would shake this diner to its core. Morning rush hour filled the air with noise. The sizzle of bacon on the flat top, the clatter of plates stacked too high, the grind of an old coffee machine that sputtered more steam than brew. The scent of burnt toast and fried potatoes lingered, as permanent as the scuff on the linoleum floor. In the middle of it all was Marissa. She wasn't loud. She didn't draw attention, but there was something magnetic in the way she moved, as though she carried the weight of 3 workers at once. Her brown hair was tied back in a frayed elastic, her apron already smudged with grease. She shifted mugs against her hip, balancing them carefully, her left hand curled tight around the tray's edge. Her right hand, the one that should have made the job easier, was out of commission, swathed in layers of gauze. Each time she reached too far or turned too fast, her breath caught in a quick, invisible flinch. But then the smile returned, practiced and steady. It was her shield, her mask, the only armor she could afford in this place. Behind the counter, Cliff leaned against the register like a king surveying his kingdom. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, a toothpick rolling across his lips. He smirked as he barked orders, every word loud enough for the room to hear. "Hustle, Marissa. What's the matter, Bandages? Cut off your ears, too." 2 women in business suits exchanged looks, leaning closer to one another. "Poor girl," one whispered. "Look at her hand. She shouldn't even be working." "Yeah," the other replied, shaking her head. "But that guy never lets up. Always riding her. I don't know how she puts up with it." Marissa hurt them. She always hurt them. The whispers, the pity, the little digs Cliff made every time she was a second too slow. But walking out wasn't an option. Rent didn't wait. Bills didn't care. Her son at home needed dinner on the table, not excuses. By mid-morning, sweat dampened the back of her neck. Her good arm ached from bearing all the weight alone, trembling slightly when she thought no one was looking. She dropped a plate of eggs at table 6 with a quick, breathless "enjoy your meal," then spun too fast, colliding with Cliff himself. The crash of water spilling across his shirt silenced the room. Cliff leaned in so close she could smell the bitter coffee on his breath. "Clumsy again?" he hissed, his words meant for her but loud enough to draw attention. "You just looking for excuses to mess up?" A man at the counter muttered, "Give her a break." A few customers shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the spectacle. But Cliff ignored them, his grin sharp, his eyes locked on Marissa like a predator savoring the hunt. She whispered an apology, reaching for a towel with her good hand, but Cliff snatched it away before she could touch it. His grin widened, cool and private, the kind of smile that told her this wasn't about a spilled drink. It was about reminding her who held the power here. And somewhere, deep in the recesses of memory, Marissa knew why. Weeks earlier, she had stumbled onto a secret. One that Cliff had every reason to keep buried. For now, though, she said nothing. She swallowed her shame, smoothed her apron with her bandaged hand, and carried on. But in the far booth, Henry Dalshin's coffee had gone cold. His jaw tightened as he watched her push through the pain. He'd run businesses long enough to recognize cruelty when he saw it. And this wasn't just bad management. Something didn't add up. Something was about to break. The smile on Marissa's face never quite reached her eyes. She wore it like armor, a mask for the world to see. But beneath the mask was a story almost no one knew. The truth of her bandaged hand wasn't a kitchen accident or clumsy fall, no matter what Cliff muttered when customers asked. The truth was far uglier. It began 3 weeks earlier, long after the last customers had gone home and the neon sign out front hummed against the midnight dark. Marissa had stayed late to wipe down tables, her good hand dragging a rag across the sticky counter while her bad one, still uninjured stacked chairs on the tabletops. The air smelled of grease and stale coffee, the kind of scent that clung no matter how hard you scrub it. That was when she heard it, Cliff's voice carrying through the thin door of the office at the back of the diner. She hadn't meant to listen. She never wanted to. But when she heard the unmistakable sound of bills being counted, her hands froze mid-wipe. "Easy pickings," Cliff muttered, his tone thick with smugness. "Skim off the top. Write it up as her mistake. Nobody questions it." Marissa frowned, her rag still pressed against the counter. She moved closer, steps quiet, heart hammering. "Another 200 this week," Cliff bragged to someone else in the room, his laughter sharp. "She's the perfect scapegoat. Always rushing, always tired. People already think she's clumsy. They'll believe anything I put in writing." The words sank into her like a stone thrown into deep water. Cliff wasn't just cruel, he was stealing. And worse, he was already planting the blame on her shoulders. Every whisper from customers, every pointed remark about mistakes, every clumsy jab. It was all groundwork for something much darker. She should have walked away. Should have left the mob leaning against the counter, slipped quietly out the back door, and pretended she hadn't heard a thing. But she didn't. She lingered. And when the laughter stopped, the door cracked open. Cliff stepped out, his shirt untucked, his grin fading the second his eyes landed on her. For a heartbeat, silence stretched. His gaze darted to the rag clenched in her fist, then back to her wide, startled eyes. "You heard." His voice was flat, stripped of its fake charm. Marissa swallowed, shaking her head. "I was just cleaning up. I didn't." But she didn't finish. Cliff's hand shot out, fingers locking around her wrist with a grip that felt like iron. He twisted without warning. A sickening pop split the air, followed by pain so white-hot it dropped her to her knees. Her cry echoed off the tile walls, muffled quickly when he leaned down, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled of whiskey and cigarettes. "Clumsy, huh?" His grin returned, sharper this time, cooler. "Let's keep it that way." Tears blurred her vision as her good hand clutched at his arm, but he squeezed tighter, a predator savoring its hold. "One word," he hissed. "One word to anyone about what you think you heard, and this," he gave her wrist another twist until she gasped, "will be the least of your problems. You won't just lose this job. You'll lose everything." He dropped her wrist, and she crumpled onto the floor, cradling her arm against her chest. Cliff straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his shirt like nothing had happened. "Now clean up and go home," he sneered, stepping back into the office. "And remember, clumsy girls don't last long in this business." The door slammed shut. Marissa sat in the empty diner, rocking slightly, biting back sobs so the cook in the back wouldn't hear. Her wrist throbbed, swelling fast, the skin already bruising in shades of purple and blue. She knew she should go to the hospital, should file a report. But the words Cliff spat at her were louder than reason. No savings, no family to lean on, no safety net, and a boy at home who depended on her. Rent didn't wait. Bills didn't care. So she wrapped her hand in makeshift bandages, told her son she'd had an accident with a tray, and came back to work the very next morning. Because what else could she do? By the time the bandages were replaced with proper gauze, the story had already spread. Cliff made sure of it. To customers who asked, he chuckled, shaking his head. "She's clumsy. Always messing things up. You wouldn't believe the reports I've had to file." And if anyone pressed harder, he'd lower his voice, feigning sympathy. "But she begged me not to cut her hours. Said she needed the money. I'm generous, you know. I let her stay." Generous. The word was a dagger. Marissa forced herself to keep moving, tray after tray, smile after smile, because silence was safer than truth. But every time Cliff barked across the diner, every time customers whispered about her bandaged hand, a fresh knot twisted in her stomach. He had stolen her dignity along with the money, and now he was parading it like theater for all to see. What Cliff didn't realize, what no one realized, was that someone had been watching. Henry Dawson, the man in the corner booth, had seen managers come and go. He'd seen hard workers and slackers, tempers and kindness. But Marissa, she was different. She worked harder than anyone else, pushed through pain without complaint, and somehow managed to greet strangers with warmth even when her eyes looked hollow. And Cliff? Cliff was the kind of man Henry had spent a lifetime rooting out of his businesses. For weeks, Henry had watched quietly, sipping his coffee, pretending to be just another retiree with nothing better to do. But he was taking notes, mental tallies of every time Cliff barked at Marissa, every time customers whispered, every time her bandaged hand trembled under the weight of one more tray. That morning, Henry's jaw tightened as Cliff strutted past his booth, laughing at something on his phone. Marissa had just asked for help with a stack of heavy plates, her left hand trembling as she tried to balance them. Cliff didn't even look at her. "Use both hands," he smirked. "Oh, wait, you can't." His chuckle spread across the diner like nails scraping glass. A few customers shot him glares, but no one spoke. Not loud enough anyway. Henry stirred his coffee slowly, forcing himself to stay still. But inside, the old instinct stirred. This wasn't just a bad manager. This was rot. Later, when Marissa leaned too far wiping a counter, Henry caught the wink she tried to hide, the way her bandaged wrist bent ever so slightly before she pulled it close to her side. He noticed, too, how she avoided walking too near Cliff, how she angled her body like someone who had already learned the cost of getting too close. It wasn't adding up. Not the injury. Not the reports Cliff bragged about. Not the fear Marissa carried like a second shadow. Henry Dawson didn't move, didn't confront. Not yet. But his gaze sharpened, his coffee long gone cold in front of him. He had built businesses on one principle. People mattered more than profits. And what he saw in his diner now was the opposite of everything he stood for. Marissa Lane was being crushed. And if Cliff thought no one important was watching, he was dead wrong. For weeks, Henry Dawson had sipped his coffee in silence, his eyes sharp behind the mask of a quiet old man. He had seen Cliff humiliate Marissa over nothing. He had seen the way her shoulders hunched whenever she passed too close to him. He had seen the bandaged hand tremble under weight it should never have carried. And every night, he'd gone home thinking about her. But tonight, as the dinner rushed in and the last of the chatter faded, Henry's patience ended. The diner had emptied into quiet pockets of clinking silverware and the hiss of coffee refills. Cliff leaned against the counter, scrolling his phone, smirking at something only he found funny. Marissa wiped down tables with her good hand, moving slower than usual but steady, always steady. Henry rose from his corner booth, his boots heavy on the tile floor, and shuffled toward the back hall. To anyone watching, it looked like an old man in search of the restroom. But his eyes weren't on the restroom door. They were on the one just beyond it, the office. The handle turned easily under his hand. Unlocked. He slipped inside. The office smelled like stale smoke and burnt coffee. A single desk sat against the wall, cluttered with papers, receipts, and a crooked lamp buzzing faintly. Henry closed the door just enough to muffle the din of sounds and pulled the lamp closer. The first thing he noticed was the stack of forms spread across the desk. His gut tightened as he flipped through them. Misconduct reports, and every single one had Marissa's name at the top. Late service, forgotten orders. Rude to customers, clumsy, careless. Page after page of accusations, all written in Cliff's jagged scroll. Henry frowned, his jaw working as he read. He'd sat in that diner for months. He'd watched Marissa move like clockwork, efficient even with one hand wrapped in gauze. He'd heard her gentle voice with customers, her quiet thank yous, her soft enjoy your meal. Not once had he seen her rude. Not once had she forgotten an order. But the paper said otherwise. He set the stack aside and reached for another pile. Register logs, numbers written in neat columns. Except the math didn't add up. Every week, the till came up short 50 here, 200 there, always written off as minor discrepancies. No notes of follow-up. No signs of corrections. Henry leaned closer, tracing the figures with a callous finger. He knew theft when he saw it. He'd caught managers skimming from bars, from shops, even from payroll when he ran businesses in his younger years. This was the same. But here, Cliff wasn't just stealing cash. He was building a paper trail to pin it on Marissa. Henry exhaled to his nose, steady and low. His blood simmered. He stacked the evidence back exactly as he'd found it, his movements precise. Years in business, and years before that in the military, had taught him control. But as he turned to leave, voices drifted through the cracked window above the desk. He froze. The laughter came first. Loud, drunken. Cliff's voice. "Another $5,000 easy," Cliff bragged. Henry stilled, leaning closer to the window. They'll never trace it. By the time anyone notices, guess who takes the fall? Little Miss Clumsy herself. He laughed again, cruel and sharp. Another voice joined in, one of Cliff's drinking buddies. "Man, you're playing with fire. What if she talks?" "She won't," Cliff said flatly, the humor drained from his tone. "Not with that hand. I made sure of it. Broke it good enough to remind her who's in charge." Henry's fist clenched at his sides. His chest rose once, twice, heavy and controlled. He'd heard enough. The conversation outside continued, muffled now with more laughter. But Henry no longer listened. His focus sharpened to a single point. Marissa Lane, working her body into exhaustion, carrying blame that wasn't hers, her hand mangled by the very man pretending to supervise her. This wasn't just theft. This was abuse. Corruption and cruelty woven together into a noose tightening around her neck. And it was happening in his diner. Henry straightened, his shadow stretching long across the office wall. For the first time in years, the old instincts stirred, the same instincts that had built empires, the same ones that had snipped out liars in contracts and cowards in boardrooms. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was war. He eased out of the office, footsteps silent, and returned to his booth. His coffee was cold, untouched. He stared into it, the reflection of the diner lights rippling with each tremor of his hand. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow the mask comes off. That night, Marissa closed her last table, thanked the customers, and stacked menus with her good hand. Cliff smirked as she passed him, muttering something only she could hear. She flinched, nodding automatically, her body folding inward. Henry's jaw clenched. She didn't see him watching. She never did. But she would, soon. Because tomorrow, the old man in the corner booth would no longer be just another customer. He would be the owner. And Cliff would learn that every lie, every forged report, every stolen dollar, and every bow he broke came with a reckoning. Henry Dawson had made up his mind. And when Henry made up his mind, there was no going back. Morning light spilled through the diner windows, painting the chrome counters in pale gold. The usual rush had begun, boots scuffing against the tile floor, coffee pots hissing, voices rising in overlapping waves. To most people, it was just another day. But to Henry Dawson, this was the day everything changed. He entered quietly, same denim jacket, same steady boots, the same corner boot he had claimed for months. But something in his walk had shifted. His shoulders squared differently. His jaw was set in a way that left no room for doubt. Today he wasn't here to drink coffee. He was here to deliver justice. Ross was already at the counter, cracking jokes too loudly with two waitresses who exchanged weary glances when his back was turned. His grin faltered for half a second when he spotted Henry, but quickly returned as if nothing could shake him. "You again," Ross called, raising his voice so the whole diner heard. "Back for your eggs? Don't worry, I'll tell Denise not to drop them this time." A few customers chuckled awkwardly, shifting in their seats. Denise froze mid-step, the tray balance on her good hand trembling just slightly. Henry didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the center of the diner, set his coffee cup on the counter, and tapped the spoon against its rim. The soft metallic ring cut through the chatter. Conversations paused. Fork stilled. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. "Morning, everyone," Henry began, his voice calm, deliberate, filling the silence with quiet authority. "I think it's time you all know who I really am." Ross laughed nervously, shaking his head. "What? You writing a memoir or something, old man? Sit down before you scare the customers." Henry's gaze locked on him, sharp as glass. "No, I own this diner." The words dropped heavy into the room. Dead silence followed. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone gasped. At table 3, the two businesswomen leaned forward, eyes wide. Denise's lips parted, her bandaged hand frozen against her apron. For years, nobody had known that the quiet man in the corner booth was the one signing their paychecks. And now, the truth echoed through the walls like a thunderclap. Ross barked out a laugh, but his face drained pale. You're joking. Come on, you don't look like you own anything but that jacket." Henry reached inside his coat and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it firmly on the counter. Pages spilled out misconduct reports, financial sheets, photocopied register logs. "I've been watching long enough," Henry said evenly. "I know what you've been doing. Every false report you filed against Denise. Every dollar you skimmed from the register. And I know what you did to her hand." Gasps rippled across the diner. Customers turned in their seats. Whispers spread like wildfire. At the far table, a man muttered, "I knew it. I knew something was off with him." Denise blinked, her eyes shimmering with disbelief. For weeks, she had carried her pain in silence, never expecting anyone to notice, much less the owner himself. Ross stammered, his voice cracking. This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything. These people, they don't care about paperwork. They'll take my word over hers." Before he could finish, the door swung open with a sharp chime. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, hands resting near their belts. Their presence alone froze Ross mid-sentence. Henry's expression never wavered. "I called them this morning," he said simply, "and I gave them copies of everything." The room held its breath. Ross's bravado shattered in an instant. "Wait, no, you can't do this. This isn't—" But the officers were already on him. One twisted his arms behind his back, the cuffs clicking shut with a finality that rang louder than his protest. The diner erupted into murmurs. Customers whispered fiercely, some in shock, others in satisfaction. Denise stood frozen near the counter, her good hand pressed against her chest. For the first time in months, Ross wasn't towering over her. The weight of blame had shifted. Henry turned to her, his tone softened now, but carrying the same authority. You've carried this place on your back, Marissa. While others lied about you, you kept it running. From today forward, you're not just a waitress. You're the new floor supervisor." Denise's lips trembled, tears pooling in her eyes. She pressed her banished hand against her mouth, muffling a sob that slipped through anyway. The diner broke into applause, some polite, some loud enough to echo. The two women at table 3 clapped first, then the young men at table 4, until the whole room filled with the sound. Ross, red-faced and thrashing, was dragged out the door. His shouts angry, desperate, faded as the police car pulled away. Inside, the diner smelled the same: burnt coffee, fried bacon. But the air felt different. Lighter, cleaner. Henry sat back in his usual booth, his coffee finally warming in his hands. But this time, he wasn't just watching. He was smiling, because justice had finally been served. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those who keep showing up, even when the world tries to break them. Denise Lane's story proved that truth always wins, and justice always finds the guilty. The applause didn't fade right away. It rolled through the diner like a tide, steady and unrelenting, drowning out the last trace of Ross's voice as the police car pulled away. Forks tapped against plates in rhythm. Some customers whistled, and even the old man by the window, who hadn't spoken in weeks, lifted his cup in a silent toast toward Denise. Denise stood frozen in the middle of it all, her chest rising and falling too fast. Her bandaged hand trembled against her lips as tears finally broke through the dam she had built for so long. Not tears of humiliation this time, not pain, but release. She had carried this weight alone, convinced no one saw her fight. Now the entire diner stood witness. Henry Dawson remained by the counter, his hand still resting on the stack of papers that had unmasked Ross. He didn't raise his voice, didn't bask in the spotlight, but his eyes softened as he watched Denise. In his decades of running businesses, factories, small shops, and now this diner, he had learned that leadership wasn't just about profits. It was about people. And today, the right person had finally been seen. He stepped closer. "You've earned this, Denise," he said, his tone low but carrying enough weight to still the applause. "This diner needs someone who understands it from the ground up, someone who knows what it means to work with heart. From today forward, you're the floor supervisor. No more silent suffering. You're in charge of his room." Her breath caught. She shook her head faintly, as if afraid it was just another cruel joke waiting to unravel. "Me? Sir, I don't know if I—" Henry interrupted gently. "You already have. Every morning you came in, even with that hand wrapped tight. Every tray you carried when others would have stayed home. Every smile you gave the customers who only saw the bandage but never guessed the pain. You ran this diner long before I said the words. Now it's official." A hush spread over the room. Then one voice broke it, an elderly woman at the counter, who leaned forward and said firmly, "About time someone recognized her." Another voice chimed in. "She's the only reason I keep coming here." Laughter, nods, and another wave of applause followed, warmer this time, less shocked, and more celebratory. Denise pressed her good hand against her chest. A sob turned into a shaky laugh. She lowered her head, whispering, "Thank you," though the words hardly seemed enough. Henry nodded once, then returned to his booth. His work was done, at least for now. He lifted his coffee cup, letting the steam curl into the sunlight. The same bitter, burnt taste clung to his tongue, but somehow it felt different, lighter, almost sweet. The diner, though unchanged in smell and sound, had shifted. The walls no longer echoed with Ross's bark. Instead, they hummed with a sense of relief, of justice settled and balance restored. Customers leaned into conversations again, their voices carrying excitement. A child giggled as her mother whispered, "Did you see that? The boss was here the whole time." Behind the counter, Denise wiped her cheeks with the corner of her apron. The tears had left streaks, but her smile stayed. She stood straighter than she had in weeks, no longer the waitress everyone pitied, but the woman they now respected. Later that afternoon, as the rush slowed and the booth emptied, Denise approached Henry's table. She hesitated before speaking, her voice careful. "Why me?" Henry looked up from his coffee. "Because you didn't quit." Those 4 words landed heavier than any speech could have. She thought of the nights she cried alone, of the mornings when the bandage still throbbed, but she tied on her apron anyway, of every insult she swallowed just to keep a paycheck coming. She hadn't known it then, but all along, her resilience had been writing her resilient. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long amber streaks across the windows. For the first time in months, Denise didn't dread closing time. Tomorrow would not be another day of fear, but the first of something new. The other waitresses gathered around her, some embarrassed for not having spoken up sooner. Others simply relieved Ross was gone. "We should have done something," one admitted, twisting her order pad. Denise shook her head gently. "What matters is he can't hurt anyone else now." Henry watched quietly from his booth. He had seen countless men like Ross in his life when they thought they had power, silent the moment that power was stripped away. But he had also seen women like Denise, the kind who bore injustice quietly, never drawing attention, but never giving in either. They were the backbone of every community he had ever known. The lesson lingered in the air, even if no one said it aloud. True strength wasn't always in shouting back. Sometimes it was in simply refusing to break. 1708. As the sun finally dipped beyond the rooftops, painting the diner in warm orange light, Henry rose to leave. He placed a few bills under his cup, though he knew he didn't need to. Denise followed him to the door. "You changed everything today," she said softly. Henry paused, his hand on the doorframe. "No, you did. I just made sure everyone saw it." She smiled faintly, tears glistening again, but this time they weren't born of pain. They were the kind that watered the roots of something new. When the door closed behind him, the diner felt different. Customers leaned back in their seats with content smiles. The waitresses moved lighter on their feet. Denise stood at the center, no longer the target of cruelty, but the symbol of survival. That night, as she locked up with the keys Ross once carried, Denise glanced around the empty diner. The booth still smelled of syrup and baking grease. The neon sign still flickered above the entrance. Nothing physical had changed, and yet everything had. She exhaled slowly, a smile tugging at her lips. For once, silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Outside, the night wrapped the street in quiet shadows. Somewhere down the block, a police siren wailed, faint and distant. But here, at the corner diner, peace had returned. Denise pressed her good hand to the glass door, looking out at the reflection of her bandaged arm. It was still broken, still tender, but it no longer defined her. Tomorrow she will walk back in not as the woman everyone pitied, but as the supervisor who had endured and overcome. Henry's words echoed in her mind, "Because you didn't quit." And that was the lesson. Never underestimate the strength of someone who keeps showing up day after day, even when the world tries to break them. Never mistake silence for weakness. And never think cruelty goes unseen. Ross had believed fear would keep Denise small. Instead, her resilience had made her powerful. The truth had risen, as it always does, and justice had found the guilty. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. In a world that can bruise, belittle, and betray, resilience is a weapon, truth is armor, and dignity, once reclaimed, is unshakable. Denise's story wasn't just about a waitress and a cool manager. It was about all of us, the quiet fighters who keep going, who keep showing up, who keep believing that one day someone will see, because eventually, someone does. And when they do, the world changes.